Thank you very much, Dr. Tutunchi, for that inspiring speech. And I would like to highlight myself that, as Dr. Tutunchi pointed out, highlighting the human rights abuse that is going on in Iran is something that the international community, as Dr. Tutunchi pointed out, has the tools and the means to do that. It is indeed time, now that everybody is focused on Iran, to highlight that and try to put an end to the abuse of human rights in Iran. Now we would like to open the floor for questions and answers, and I would like our panelists to offer any kind of other comments that they have right now. So who's going to help with the microphone down there?
Thank you, everybody. That was impressive. Mr. Ambassador, I heard on public radio the other day that Facebook hit about 2 billion memberships or uses in the course of a single day. There's a lot on the world press about the Internet and access and hacking and blocking, etc. Since an idea is certainly more powerful than a bullet, I'm curious as to what kind of organized approach there might be with people who have power, namely the people who so far have messed up everything in the negotiations, to organize some way of getting this message out domestically and in Iran, and at least in English, French, and Italian, since that seems to be where most of the expat Iranians live. Could you comment on that as a possible useful idea?
Well, thank you for the question. I'll start by noting that when President Obama gave his defense of the nuclear agreement on August 5th at American University, he talked in the initial part of his speech about John F. Kennedy and the struggle against the Soviet Union. And he said that in spite of the fact that the Soviet Union was an arch enemy and adversary and totally opposed to our way of life, we managed to have several arms control and disarmament agreements with the Soviets, and the President Obama listed those. I found that comparison unsatisfying for one reason. At the same time that we were sitting in Geneva and elsewhere negotiating those arms control agreements, we had a U.S. information agency, and we had Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, and we had a range of information operations, if I could use that term, intelligence operations. We were trying to influence people on the inside. We had Foreign Broadcast Information Service, FIBIS, that was published, that translated all of their internal press into English so that policymakers could read them several days late. We used to have piles of these things in the 60s and 70s on our desks in the Pentagon. I didn't get there till 1981, but FIBIS was basically aimed at trying to understand what the debate was on the inside. And we had a CIA-funded magazine called Problems of Communism, filled with very intelligent essays on how do we move the politics inside this monolithic country. We're not doing any of that with Iran today. So that's the first part of the answer. We're not doing any of that. And the President was mistaken to compare this to the days of the Cold War. I come back to a comment I made before, which is that we clearly were afraid if we did anything to offend the Iranians, they might run away from the nuclear talks, and we weren't prepared to have that happen. So we sat on our hands in a lot of ways. The Canadian government 2 years ago launched an initiative through some universities, and I don't have the paperwork here, but I do have it, that was aimed at breaking through the firewalls in the information space in Iran, so the Iranian people could receive Western information, and it wouldn't be censored, filtered, or substituted by the Revolutionary Guard's information campaign. Now, many of you have relatives inside the country and will probably know more than I do that, in fact, Iranians do get information from the outside world. They have satellite dishes if they're not caught, so they get Iranian national TV, and I've been to those studios in Europe, which are well hidden. It's a great resource. I'm shocked that the United States government isn't trying to leverage that resource. Then there's the internet, Facebook. You may know about the rich kids of Tehran. I'm sure a lot of people will smile. For one day, there was a page that popped up on Instagram that had an amazing assortment of pictures that looked right out of a Hollywood movie of the most sort of rich and, the debauchery of Malibu. Swimming pools, Lamborghinis, Rolexes, huge glasses of red wine, men with their arms draped around women who were not covered, obviously, or were barely covered at all. These were the sons and daughters of the regime. It came down in less than a day, but it stuck in the global internet. I don't really have a great answer, but because I'll just say I was the chairman of the board of a company that did something in this area, not in Iran, that I can't talk about. So I know something about the government trying to do information. It's expensive, and there's too much bureaucracy. When people hear about it, they want to put their hands on it. Why does he get to do it? I want to be briefed on everything. And the potential for leaks is very high. So I'm torn because I think the United States government should have a dispensation that uses outside resources to promote breakdown of the firewalls. And actually, no one in Washington is smart enough, including me, to know what to say to the people of Iran. The best thing you can do is to talk to you and to your beautiful children and let them know that they have an uncle in Camp Liberty, and these kids are playing lacrosse and they're getting straight A's, and they're going to go to the best colleges in the world, like Berkeley, and they're living just fine in America, and they're respected, and women can be presidents of companies in this country. That's the message that should come across. All I would do as the government is give them a better microphone and turn up the amplification and get people from Hollywood to help make the message as beautiful as it could be so that people would want to watch it. I think we can do it. I mean, I think that the truth is power. What we heard here was incredibly compelling. And if there's enough people holding up their history, and these people will have nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. And they won't have to confront America. They'll have to confront 80 million Iranians.
Yes, thank you very much for amazing presentations. It seems like there are two scales of time. We have till the end of September to decide on this current proposed nuclear deal. The solution you're suggesting of propaganda, basically, into Iran, using your analogy of the United States and the Soviet Union, Kennedy in 1960 was doing one thing. The Soviet Union didn't fall until 1990, so it took 30 years for that propaganda to make a difference until Gorbachev came into power, and so on. So that's a long-term solution. Well, my question is for the panel, what should we do in the next month? Should we support this deal or not? And the question is, if we don't support it, the argument against refusing the deal is that our partners will back out. And that Great Britain, as you said, Great Britain is always making deals with them. Russia will go in and sell them this and that, and China and so on, that somehow they'll win anyhow. Even if we back out, the regime there will win. What is your advice to the United States in the short term?
And this is a tough one, but I'll start by saying I'm not sure there's any bandwidth left in the debate. What I mean by that is that among those who have a vote, the House will vote against it overwhelmingly. The Senate may will vote against it, and the President will veto the resolution. And then the question is, can the Senate muster 67 votes to override a presidential veto? And what I'm hearing in Washington is they may have 60, but that the leaders on the Republican side in the Senate don't think they have the votes. So it's really down to 4 or 5 or 6 senators. Which way will they go? That's really what that question is about. So to support or not to support. Second thing I would say is that what's interesting is that 2 of the most outspoken critics, I don't want to lump them together because one I was going to say is supremely articulate. That would be Alan Dershowitz, the famed lawyer at Harvard. The other one is forceful. That would be Donald Trump. They've both criticized this deal passionately, but they've both said, if it's going to go, if it fails, it becomes really an unwieldy situation for the reasons you said. So Dershowitz is very angry about how this came out, very troubled by where it leads, but even more troubled that now that we've sort of baked the cake and there's no more eggs in the refrigerator, if you don't get a do-over, we're stuck with it. They should have done a much better job, would be his view, but they didn't. We're stuck with it, but it's all we've got. So it's not the be-all and end-all. The be-all and end-all is the policy. Okay, so you have this disarmament agreement. Now what are you going to do? What are we going to do in Syria? What are we going to do in Iraq? What are we going to do in Yemen? What are we going to do with the human rights situation? What are we going to do about tracking the money? What are we going to do about transparency? Trump, being a businessman, makes a very interesting point. He just says he doesn't break contracts. Once you sign a contract, it's a contract. So that's a very interesting point of view not to be overlooked. Because here's a guy that's trying to capture the right wing of the Republican Party, and he's doing, but he's saying, I wouldn't break the contract if it goes through. So, what happens next is what they should be talking about. And I would simply look on your Facebook, you'll see, or your Twitter, you'll see some news from Malaysia, where I just did it tonight. There are 200,000 people, by their own count. The police say it's a lot less, in Kuala Lumpur, a Muslim population rising up against the Prime Minister because they think that a wealth fund that he put together to help the economy in 2009, that the Prime Minister took $700 million out of the fund. And now there's 200,000 people in the streets, and they're coming back tomorrow. That's a Muslim population, folks. So you saw what happened in Tunisia. You saw Egypt. They started it in Syria. Look at Ukraine. In Hong Kong, they had a long demonstration, but the more recent one was the Chinese were trying to impose the same voting system that Iran has, which is the Communist Party in Beijing gets to choose who qualifies to run for the chief executive of Hong Kong, same system as president of Iran. The people of Hong Kong took to the streets and would not let it happen. There's a lot of people taking to the streets for the very, very same things that the people of Iran want. It's happening right now. I said before that I was shocked when I heard President Obama say the theocrats who overthrew the Shah, because they didn't overthrow the Shah. The Shah fell through the efforts of a lot of people. The theocrats overthrew the revolution. And the revolution has bubbled back again and again and again. It bubbled back when the NLF went in 1988. It bubbled back in 2009 when fraud happened in the election and people took to the streets. It's there. So I think if we do nothing, years could pass. But I do think that it's a very delicate situation. So I described some things that I think the regime gained in this negotiation, but I neglected to point out that I think that there are many vulnerabilities, as I think the other speakers pointed out very well. They're juggling a lot of things. I mean, Syria is not a very tenuous situation. Iraq with these Shia militias and the Sunnis who are not going to, ISIS won't last forever in its current form. Something's got to give in Iraq. There's a huge corruption purge going on. There's a lot of turmoil inside Iraq right now. Yemen, it looks like the Saudi troops have come in, and they're going to push the Houthis out of Sana'a. So, by the way, the Iranians, through their actions, started at least 3 wars in the Middle East since we started negotiating this deal. Hot wars. The Turks are now, involved inside Syria. So that's 3 military cross-border interventions, and we've lost 2 embassies in Sana'a, Damascus, not to mention Tehran, thanks to this regime. When are we going to sit up and say, we got to do something about this? So I'm of the mind that there are vulnerabilities there. And the one thing, if I had one wish for Washington, and I'm sorry to go on and on about this, it is that the intention that we heard the President speaking at the United Nations in the fall of 2013, he now says, I was just focused on the nuclear issue, folks. No, go back and read the UN speech. He was dreaming of a better day with Iran where we would moderate their behavior, we would cooperate. Secretary Kerry said the same thing. There's a lot of evidence that they had their eyes on this beautiful image of moderating Iran. If you listen to some of the think tanks and the U.S. Institute of Peace, there's a big focus on the Twitter accounts of Zarif and Rouhani. And it's not much emphasis on the justice minister. Okay, that's the difference. And this is the baton that needs to be taken away from the administration. They negotiated for 2 years. We're not thrilled with the result. It is what it is. Take the baton away from them. Congress needs to say, you don't deserve to write the next chapter. The next chapter has to be a national policy worthy of the name. This administration clearly thinks that they can start working with Iran in places like Syria and Iraq, and then they get their wrists slapped by people who know something, and they say, well, I didn't really mean it. They don't, as the President has said in Iraq twice, we don't really have a strategy. We need a strategy.
I would like to thank the ambassador for the very informative session that we had, and all of the panelists, especially Sheila with her experience of what she went through, and she's a witness of such a horrible dictatorship. As far as we're concerned, as an Iranian woman, I would give you my point that the resistance, as Shaheen said, is going to go on. With deal or without deal, we're going to overthrow this government. That's as far as us Iranians are concerned. And to the gentleman who asked the question, I would like to point out, during Soviet Union, there weren't as much communication in the world. Right now, people of Iran, about 60% of the population are the young people, that you cannot take away the power of information from those kids. And we need to keep that in mind. And with that said, I'm sure what we need is the support of American and Western government, not to give us weapons, not to give us money, just let us be. Let us fight our fight, and let us overthrow this brutal regime that's making so much disaster in the Middle East and in the region. And I really appreciate what Mr. Ambassador said regarding the Iranian regime to be victimized. They are trying to make themselves look moderate. They try to look themselves as they can reform. What we saw within 4 years of Rouhani, we had 2,000 executions in Iran. And we're trying to, when we talk about the massacre of political prisoners in Iran in 1988, we are trying to tell you, if a deal goes through, what's going to happen to those kids in jail again? Are we going to have another massacre? And this regime that is capable of wiping out 30,000 people in a matter of months, isn't that regime capable of destroying the whole world? Thank you so much. That's my question to you, Mr. Ambassador.
What's? Yes. A short one.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your comment. When I hear Iranian people talk about their own country, I'm very humbled, because much of what I've learned comes from you. And the only reason that I stand behind a microphone is that I'm very concerned about the United States policy, because I can see that there's a gap between what people think who are in high positions and what the real truth is. So I just urge you to spread this message, and I appreciate the fact that the way you said it was forward-looking, talking about the young people of Iran and about their aspirations and about women. This is a positive message. How could we not want to align American foreign policy with the aspirations of the youth of Iran? It seems so basic. So, again, I think your comment was very well said. I don't have anything to add to it, but I think people should listen to what you're saying. It's a very important message. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time. And is there another question?
My question to Mr. Ambassador, I'm wondering how Iranian government been able to get away with all the crime has done, not only against Iranian people, but the state-sponsored terrorism that they done around the world. Over 1,000 Iranian activists been shot and killed all over Europe and Turkey, India, Pakistan. But not only that, Iranian government been involved in some major terrorism activity that, been overlooked. And I'm wondering, really what is going on. The bombing in the Beirut, which killed over 400 U.S. Marines, the bombing in the Saudi Arabia that killed the U.S. Air Force members in their dormitories, the bombing in Argentina that killed, many people, innocent people who were gathered for some fundraising, and on and on. There have been so many big acts of terrorism by this government that it never been, looked at or brought to question. Right now, we have heard that they arrested the guy who was in charge of the bombing in Saudi Arabia. And why not the Senate and Congress request to bring this case up and see who was behind this bombing? And if there is a clear question, answer that who was behind it, why not put it on the table and demand for some action on that? And if our partners in France or Germany, the multinational corporations, are eager to jump in Iran and make billions of dollars, as has they been doing, during Ahmadinejad, he sold close to $1 trillion of oil, and according to Iranian government, $600 billion of it is disappeared. So we want to know why this issue is really not coming out, why it doesn't become a big issue, especially in Senate and Congress, to hold the government, to please answer to this question, like who is...
I'm sorry, Ambassador, if you let me, I
Go
think
ahead,
this
Nancy.
lady had a question also, maybe
Okay.
From you, and then you can answer
We can
both at the...
take one more, sure. I will answer that one, though.
Last
Wait a
question,
minute.
please.
She's going to wait. That's
Okay.
okay.
I was the Pentagon desk officer for Lebanon when the Marines were bombed, and when TWA 847 was taken, when Colonel Rich Higgins was killed, when a number of terrorist acts and hostage takings occurred. I went to the Kuwait defense minister's house with my boss when Khomeini mined the Persian Gulf, and when we decided to put American flags on Kuwaiti oil tankers to protect them, and we shot the Iranian boats to clear the way. I stood at the Jewish Community Center in Argentina 3 days after 9/11 and had a surprise ceremony with imams as well as Christian and other faiths to stand together. I've watched the bloodstains of Iran's terrorism all over the world. I feel like if you ever saw the movie Forrest Gump, I just happened to be there when a lot of these things happened. So I know I have 30 years of watching these things happen. I don't forget. The answer to your question is that the U.S. bureaucracy has been traumatized repeatedly by its engagements with Iran over many years. The hostage crisis was a shock, a culture shock in America, in Washington, unlike any we had experienced. And then with Desert One, the rescue operation that failed in the desert where we lost soldiers, that compounded the pain. President Carter's presidency was destroyed. Ronald Reagan came in. So when the Iranians then got in trouble with the Iran-Contra affair, arms to Khomeini, the money to the Nicaragua Contras, we had a scandal in Washington that shocked people in ways that you would never know, but believe me, it was. I went before a grand jury 6 years after they indicted Caspar Weinberger because I was the one that searched all the Pentagon policy files. I didn't do anything wrong, but I may have known something. We were all under close investigation. People stopped taking notes in foreign policy. No more notes because of Iran-Contra. It was traumatic. It changed the way we do business mentally. We weren't the same after that. Iran has done this again and again, the hostages, etc. And after a while, people come and go, they leave, they get tired, they get exhausted. I mean, exhausted of the point of we must do something about this. And you get to the point where the Saudis arrest this man the other day for the Khobar Towers, and there's nobody in Washington that says, let's go debrief this person, let's get the whole story, let's make a movie, let's tell the families of the 19 airmen, let's find out the whole architecture of how this worked. I don't think our intelligence community cares. When I wrote my book on the MEK, I wrote it for them. Here's a primer on every one of these alleged terrorist acts. This is what really happened, because you don't seem to know. You've been signing all these reports every year that change from year to year that are all wrong. So I hate to say this, but I think we've gotten isolated from Iran, tired of Iran, exhausted by all the scandals, and we keep beating each other up inside Washington about Iran issues. We never beat them up. We beat ourselves up. We fight over things like the Iran nuclear deal. We're not fighting them. We're fighting each other. So you get tired of that. This is where the community comes in, and this is what I wanted to say. You have the ability, and the National Council of Resistance has the files in Paris to put together a dossier, an education on everyone who's in power right now. Here's what they really did throughout their lifetime. Here's what they're guilty of. If the question could be, what would happen if we had a war crimes trial at The Hague? Who would be up on charges? And then you could put the dossiers together. I've been talking to my friends at the NCRI for years about this. They have the ability to do it. I would be happy to work with them to do it. But with that kind of information, information is power. Washington doesn't have this information. They still won't talk to the MEK, even though we suggested it from the stage in Paris in June. They still won't do it because the Iranian regime will get angry. Maybe they'll change their mind soon. But information is the key to this, and the Iranian diaspora has it, and we need to get organized, and we need to package it, and we need to educate people. That's why I wrote my book, and there's a lot more where that came from. It's powerful. It changes things, and that's where we need to go. So I'm not a pessimist, but we do need to get busy. That's a great idea. I'm going to follow up on the one about Khobar Towers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.